The Secrets of Star Trek is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV, series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the Strange New Worlds episode, Ghosts of Illyria. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hi, Jimmy.
Nanu.
And, hello, Mark. And Father Cory Sticha. Hi, Father Cory.
Wrong franchise. Shazbot.
Tune in, Orson. And Father Cory Sticha. Hi, Father Cory.
How's it going, Dom? I'm not as clever as Jimmy, so I can't come up with something.
No.
Folks, be sure to follow The Secrets of Star Trek in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, your favorite podcast app, or at the StarQuest YouTube channel. We should also be sure to hit the bell to get notifications. Stick around to the end. We've got some great feedback at the end of this episode. And I want to tell you about another show on the network. This is a special mention, by the way, because The Secrets of Star Wars this week, episode 118, that comes out on Tuesday after this show has come out. So by the time you listen to this, you may have heard it. It may already be out. They have an interview with John Jackson Miller, who's the author of both several Star Wars books, but also several Star Trek novels, including several featuring Captain Pike's Enterprise, including Enterprise War, which is the book we were giving away to patrons not long ago, but also a new book that came out last August featuring Cristobal Rios called Star Trek Rogue Elements, I think it's called, off the top of my head. And he said in that podcast interview that's his favorite project he's done so far. That it's kind of a romp, I think is how he described it. So definitely check out Secrets of Star Wars number 118, that interview with John Jackson Miller. Star Trek fans will really enjoy that. So let's talk about this Ghosts of Illyria with Strange New Worlds. And Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens?
This week, our Let's Meet the Crew of the Enterprise episode focuses on Una Chin Riley, or Number One, as the opening log reveals to us. The Enterprise has come to a planet that was a home to colonists belonging to a race known as the Illyrians, who had genetically engineered themselves, and so they were not allowed to join the Federation. We need to have transporter and communication problems for this story to work, so of course there's an ion storm, or a thunderstorm, as we call it on Earth. Number One gets most of the landing party back up to the ship, but Captain Pike and Spock are stranded on the surface. Once aboard, a strange virus that is spread by light starts infecting the crew, and they become obsessed with getting more light on their bodies, and they start doing suicidal things, like, trying to release the energy in the warp core to get more light. Back on the planet, strange energy creatures protect Pike and Spock from the storm, and Spock learns that the creatures are the missing Illyrian colonists who accidentally created the virus. Big surprise, the episode is called Ghosts of Illyria. What did you expect to happen? Yeah. In a desperate attempt to, they created this virus in a desperate attempt to genetically engineer themselves so they could join the Federation. On the ship, Number One strangely turns out to be the only one immune to the virus. Only it's not so strange because it turns out she's a genetically engineered Illyrian augment. Eventually, La'an develops antibodies to the virus by being near Number One during the warp core overload event, and they use the antibodies to cure everybody. Number One then tries to resign her commission in Starfleet as she lied about her genetic status to get in, but Pike rejects the offer and won't turn her in. It's also revealed that the reason the light virus got on board was because of a malfunction in Dr. Mbenga's emergency medical transporter. He wouldn't let it be upgraded at a starbase recently because he's been keeping his terminally ill daughter alive in suspended animation in its pattern buffer in hopes of finding a cure for her out in space. Number One agrees to keep his secret too, and also to arrange a technical fix so this won't happen again. The end.
So you mentioned the title Ghosts of Illyria kind of gives away that the fire creatures are the Illyrians, but I think it has a double meaning because I think the ghosts of Illyria is also Una. She's sort of a ghost of Illyria in hiding. in plain sight.
Maybe.
The fact that Illyrians couldn't join the Federation because of their augment status, and that's kind of haunting, if you will, the people on this planet, but also, of course, Una herself.
Yeah, to my mind, it's the fire monsters colonists that are themselves the ghost of Illyria, though I can't rule out that that alternative meanings would have been in mind as well. One thing that I thought was notable about this episode is it's another in which we're questioning Starfleet ideology again. Mm-hmm. Just like we've like last episode or an episode or two ago, we were questioning the Prime Directive. Now we're questioning the genetic augment rule, and they're trying to flesh this out and flesh out conceptually the Star Trek universe by looking at Federation ideology and trying to paint it in more complex terms.
Right.
It's certainly understandable. You had a war with genetic augments that almost ended humanity. Yeah, you might want to ban that. In fact, we probably want to ban certain forms of genetic engineering right now before we get in real life, before we get into problems. But on the other hand, you have people like Julian Brashear and Number One who are not hostile augments, and you can argue, well, they, regardless of how they got the way they are, they shouldn't be barred from Starfleet at this point.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting that they kind of sent us down a false trail by naming La'an Noonan Singh, by making her a descendant of Khan Noonan Singh, and they even put a point on that in this episode of talking about him.
Yep.
And yet she wasn't the augment.
Right.
It was Una who's the one that was talking about it.
Right.
So they kind of sent us down a false trail that this is going to come up, and it did, just not the way that we originally expected.
I think La'an is, she's not an augment herself, but I assume she has Khan's modified genes in her. It's several generations later, so it's not going to be a lot.
Yeah.
But I think she is historically genetically modified, which also brings up a point about the Illyrians. The mere fact, if they're not hostile and they want to join the Federation, I don't care what they've done in their history with genetic modification. It's like, okay, you want to join, you don't do genetic modification going forward.
Right.
But if your current situation is working, we're not going to bar you just because of what your ancestors did with gene editing.
I think it implied that it's an ongoing thing, that genetic modification is a thing that they continue to do.
Yeah, so just stop it and you can join. Right.
Well, and they take the genetic modification a different way, because instead of being, with Khan and the other super soldiers, they were, to become more powerful, to be the rulers of the world and this kind of thing. With the Illyrians, they say it's to be more in harmony with the world, so that they would modify themselves so that perhaps they didn't have to use as many resources, or they could, instead of being carnivores, they could be vegetarians or something like that.
Instead of changing or terraforming planets, they can modify themselves to adapt to the planet.
Breathe more carbon dioxide instead of,
And this would happen naturally for evolutionary reasons on a planet. If you took a human population and moved it to a planet with lighter gravity, they would grow taller.
Yeah.
And like in Larry Niven's Known Space has examples of this. In his case, it's not because of genetic engineering. It's just because of the environmental effects of growing up off of Earth. But his Belter civilization in the asteroid belt, they're all like 7 foot tall and way more limber than normal humans. So like you can smoke your cigarette with your foot instead of your arms.
Right.
His Jinxians, Jinx is a high gravity moon of a gas giant. They are short and they are built like bricks. They're highly muscular and short to resist that heavy gravity. And they don't live very long as a result compared to other humans. But even here on Earth, we have genetic diversity based on the environments people grow up in. In Italy and in many parts of Africa, a lot of people are prone to sickle cell anemia. And the reason they're prone to sickle cell anemia is the same genes that give you sickle cell anemia also give you resistance to malaria. And in swampy regions and jungly regions in Italy and Africa, and yes, there were lots of swamps around Rome in ancient Italy. They've largely been drained, but they would have mosquitoes that would breed and give people malaria. And so people bred malaria-resistant genes, which also increased the risk of getting sickle cell anemia. There's a sponge diving group in I think it's in the Pacific. It's like, I forget if it's part of Indonesia or not, but there's a population there that they dive for sponges as part of their living, and they can hold their breath for way longer than normal people can. Normal people can hold their breath for like a minute, maybe two, without special training. Two is really hard, but these people can stay underwater for like 10 minutes.
Like, I can think of an example that's not quite so exotic just here on this panel. I could walk outside my house right now and be comfortable in t-shirt. If Jimmy showed up, he'd be in coat and scarf, and because it's about 55 degrees outside. Because I've acclimated to cooler weather than San Diego usually gets.
Yeah, actually, I tend to be hot-blooded, so I do really well in cold environments.
But I mean, it's actually, there's a lot of times where people come from a northern climate and they go down south, and it's uncomfortable, very uncomfortable for them, and vice versa. Whether I'd be comfortable in, somebody from the south doesn't like it so much.
What I noticed growing up is there's a switch that gets thrown biologically, where as the seasons would change, I would notice I'm getting uncomfortable, and then all of a sudden, oh no, this is fine. Yeah. And it's like a switch that gets thrown. It's like, okay, I'm in my winter mode now, or I'm in my summer mode now. 55
for me, 55 in September is very different from 55 in April. You know, that I get 55 in September is very cold as opposed to.
Or how about 55 in July?
Right.
The world's ending. We're going to freeze.
Yeah.
But in the idea of genetic modifications or body forming instead of terraforming is something that does come up in science fiction, because why wait generations to adapt if you've got the tech to just let's adapt this now so we don't have to suffer through several generations.
Right.
So another interesting concept that this episode brings up is something that's sort of related to an episode we talked about on Mysterious World, which is mind control parasites. The virus is a light transmitted virus, controls their minds to make them want to be around light, therefore more transmissible.
Yep.
Which is if you want to check that out, I forget what number that was, but that's I
can find that. But mind parasites will affect your mind, including people. I've said for years that when people would come to work and say, oh, and they're coughing their lungs out and they're saying, oh, don't worry, I'm not contagious. It's like the germs want you to say that. And that's literally true, except it's almost literally true. It's not that, germs, obviously, by the way, this is episode 59, The Mysterious World on Mind Control Parasites. They're not conscious, but their biological strategy is to get you to be around other people so they can get affected too, and they can complete their life cycle and keep their germ species going.
Yep.
And there, as we talk about in episode 59, there is evidence that that germs like the flu are affecting your mind, because they've done studies like when people get the flu vaccine and they have this, if it's an attenuated flu vaccine, they've got little bits of the flu building up in their bloodstream. And all of a sudden, people who love to stay at home want to go out and socialize and have parties and go to bars while the flu is building up in them.
Right. By the way, if you want to listen to that episode, you can go in your web browser to mysterious.fm/59. That'll take you right to that episode.
And with the whole thing with the they're being attracted to the light, I actually kind of thought they were going to lead towards they're becoming like Mothmen or something like that, where because it's really the way people were acting. They were acting more like moths gathering around a flame.
Well, Hemmer almost did. We'll talk about that in a bit, but Hemmer almost
literally did. Yeah.
Literally did that.
Actually, so this is an illustration of how this virus did not co-evolve with humans. This is like space Ebola. The thing about really dangerous, the most successful viruses are the ones that do the least harm. That's why the common cold is common, because it doesn't really hurt you. It's inconvenient, but very few people actually die from the common cold. You'd have to have major underlying health issues to die from the common cold. And so because it doesn't really hurt you, it gets to spread widely, because if you're really hurting, you're going to stay home and not socialize. Whereas things like Ebola, which is very dangerous and kills the host very rapidly, it never gets a chance to spread because the host dies so quickly. Yep. Well, this light virus clearly is in the Ebola category because it makes them want to do things that will blow up the ship and kill all of the infected people.
Right.
So if this had been going on for generations with humans, then the virus would have co-evolved to be less dangerous so that it could spread more widely and not cause antimatter explosions when it infects a population of humans.
Right. Speaking of the Illyrians, we encountered them before in Star Trek, right? They were in Enterprise, the series Enterprise. An episode called Damage was one of them.
So this was during the Xindi arc, and the Enterprise was damaged, and they needed a warp coil that they tried to get from this Illyrian ship, and they eventually stole.
Okay.
Yeah. Captain Archer went hardcore and just stole their warp core and stranded them in space light years from anywhere.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Was that the only one? There might have been other episodes, or
that's the only one I could see on Memory Alpha.
Okay. Okay. So that's where they have appeared before, and that's in canon. We have,
by the way, before I forget, a general comment. I heard someone make this. So Strange New Worlds is based on the original pilot for Star Trek. Yeah, and so a pilot episode is shown to get a pickup order for a series. And so the original pilot, The Cage, with Captain Pike and Number One and Mr. Spock, it got modified to become the original series, but now we've got an actual series based on that original pilot. And in television history, this is now the longest distance between pilot and pickup. 55 years between the pilot for the series and when it gets picked up as its own thing.
That's pretty cool, actually.
I guess technically that's true. Yeah, that's right. All right, so you mentioned the ion storm. This is a Star Trek weather weird thing.
It's a thunderstorm, and I'm guessing thunderstorms involve lightning, and that involves ions. So if you want to call a thunderstorm an ion storm, I guess
this is a space thunderstorm. And by the way, we recorded 2 episodes today that involve space storms, because the Doctor Who episode that you'll hear later, that comes out later
in a few weeks.
In a few weeks, that involved a space storm as well. So.
That's right. If they regularly strike the planet, why does this one cause so much damage? That's my thought. But it's only the most damaging one ever when they show up. So
of course.
Speaking of when they show up, there was a colony of people who were genetically modifying themselves on this planet. And they've now disappeared, and you're here to try to figure out what made them mysteriously disappear. Is it really advisable to beam down on a planet without a biosuit?
Yes.
When you're investigating the disappearance of people who are experimenting with what you view as illegal or immoral genetic experimentation?
I think we're a little too confident in our biofilters and the transporter. I think it's part of the problem.
As the episode proves.
Although I did really like the way they explained how the biofilter works in this episode, because at one point, Number One goes to Hemmer and says, well, could it be something that the filter didn't recognize, and so it slipped through? And he said, no. If it doesn't recognize it, it eliminates it.
Right.
So any bioform has to be recognized in order to pass through the filter, which is actually a good way to do it.
But it also means positive filter as opposed to a negative filter in that sense.
Although it also means you're going to kill any aliens you try to bring up.
It's that. Yes, this is true. So Ensign Cannon Fodder opens this cupboard down on the planet. There's glowy bits in there, and that's always a bad thing. Someone had lit a campfire and there were sparks still or something. But that's where he gets infected. I have to say, Transporter Chief Kyle, this version of him he doesn't seem to know what he's doing with the transporters, because every episode so far, all 3 of these episodes have had transporter problems where this poor guy is standing there like, I don't know what's going on. He's got this confused look in his face throughout. The transporter problems has been a key plot device in all 3 episodes. In other words, it's just, I have to point that out.
Yeah, we're dealing with Star Trek technology, not Babylon 5 technology.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is a reference to J. Michael Straczynski, the creator of Babylon 5, wanted his show not to be driven by gimmicks of the week. He wanted it to be character-based, and the plot is driven by the characters and their relationships and the political relationships between their empires and so forth. And so he made a decision. In the Babylon 5 universe, technology works right out of the box. We will not do stories on malfunctioning technology. And so all of these things, I mean, like I said in the recap at the beginning, in order for this story to work, we need transporter problems and we need communication problems. So we have breakdowns or something interfering with the tech. Just imagine how many holodeck stories we would have if the holodeck works safely.
Yes.
One. Well, maybe 2. Maybe when they have to rescue Vic from a programming, something that was designed into the programming. But almost all the holodeck stories we get involve some kind of malfunction.
True.
And you've got your Ultimate Computer all the way back in the original series. That story is driven by technology malfunction. So Star Trek is heavily dependent on technology malfunctions to get a story going every week.
And in a way, like, they've kind of gone back to that same well of plot device, because last week it was communicator and transporter problems. And so I kind of hope to get away from that and kind of expand their plot devices a little bit more beyond that. But that would be good.
And this is a younger Chief Kyle than you see in TOS. So, I mean, you can give him a little bit, although, this is supposed to be the flagship of the Federation. So you think that the transporter chief would be like the best transporter chief in the Federation.
In TOS, Scotty usually shows up and shoves Kyle aside to take over and do it.
Yeah, that's true too.
So anyway, everyone beams up except Pike and Spock, because Spock has wandered off from the party and he needs to be tracked down because he doesn't have a leash on him. And the away team, meanwhile, aboard starts acting strangely, looking for more light. But number 1 gets all glowy and then stops. And I was kind of annoyed because when she gets the report from Dr. Mbega that people are starting to have these weird things, she doesn't say, oh, I'm having it too. And I thought it was going to be one of those devices where, oh, here's an officer who refuses to believe that they could get sick or have anything bad happen. But it wasn't that case. It was actually a deeper problem. So I'm glad they didn't have that trope there.
Yeah, in my notes, when we hit that part of the episode, I have that she's either lying or doesn't realize how affected she's been. But it may be somewhat the latter, that she doesn't realize it, but it's what we eventually learn. And the reason she gets glowy, whereas meaning her skin starts glowing red.
Yeah.
Is because she's an Illyrian and that's her immune system fighting the virus off.
Right.
Correct.
It burns it out, which is interesting because she doesn't produce antibodies. We find out it's just the system. It's like a biofilter. It destroys whatever doesn't belong, and it does. So there's no antibodies for her for them to harvest to create a vaccine.
Another trope that they avoided in this episode was get somebody's pristine DNA like Kirk or Spock's who didn't get infected on the planet and run everybody through the transporter. Right. That would be another trope.
I like the part of it is that the people who get infected have a vitamin D deficiency. They need light.
This was interesting. I mean, they first say it's cholecalciferol, which is that's vitamin D3, and then they immediately say, oh, vitamin D, and it's not scientific realism, but it makes sense if you have a vitamin D deficiency and exposure to sunlight can cure the vitamin D deficiency, then you could want more light of certain frequencies. That could be part of the virus's replication strategy. It drives down your vitamin D level and then somehow induces you to want to go to the thing that will fix the vitamin D level so it can spread. What they then did was I thought something of a missed opportunity, because they establish that Lieutenant, or not Lieutenant yet, but Cadet Uhura does not have the virus, even though she's living with 2 roommates who do. And the reason they go for is it's because she likes to sleep in a dark, sleeping pod. And so she was not exposed to light. Well, she then got exposed to light when she came out of the sleeping pod.
Right.
But what I thought would have been more interesting would be to relate this somehow to Uhura's African heritage, because the reason that that Europeans have lighter color skin is because they grew up in higher latitudes ancestrally, and so the sunlight strikes the Earth at an oblique angle as the higher or the farther south you go. So we got our friends down in the southern hemisphere too, but the higher away, the farther away from the equator you get, the less you're going to be able to utilize sunlight to make vitamin D. And so that's why Northern Europeans lost so much of the melanin in their skin. Melanin is a pigment that darkens your skin. And so people who grew up in sub-Saharan Africa, they've got a lot of it because they're closer, and their ancestors were closer to the equator. So they got more direct sunlight, and they needed the melanin to block the sunlight, because it has harmful effects. But you got less direct sunlight up in Northern Europe, and so they needed to lose the melanin so they could use the light more effectively to make vitamin D. And I thought we could have an interesting little genetics, history, science aspect to this plot if the fact that Uhura has African heritage is why, or part of why, she is resistant to this virus. But they didn't choose to go there.
Yeah.
I would make one caveat though, Jimmy. You said, that you get more direct sunlight at the equator than you do in the extreme north, extreme south. It's more consistent direct sunlight throughout the year. Because I would argue that right now here in Montana, I get have a chance for much more direct sunlight because we're approaching summer than they do at the equator, because the sun is tilted more towards to the sun in the northern hemisphere. So, I mean, it's a minor niggle, but because you're right.
I'm
it's just
talking on average through the year. If you're on the equator, you're going to get more of the light.
Yeah.
But that's absolutely right. But also, of course, by using that where she was in the darkened birth, she then didn't catch the virus because the virus spreads by light, not through the air.
But she came out, so she should have got it then. That's a bit of an oversight in the writing.
But she was further behind in the cycle of it. So.
Maybe, yeah. And plus viruses, they don't always strike exactly how you expect too. That's 2 people in the same room don't always get it exactly the same. So we have Engineer Hemmer, and I wrote a note at around this point. He's got this attitude that kind of comes across like arrogance, but it's kind of fun.
It is arrogance, and I'm not sure how always fun it is. Like he has this line, and it's one of two lines like this in the episode. But Hemmer, the other is Nurse Chapel, but hers is softer than Hemmer's. But he's got to do this in order to fix the transporter problem. He's got to do some kind of whiz-bang technobabble thing involving the ship's systems, which is what causes the malfunction with the emergency medical transporter that lets the virus on board. But Hemmer fixes this and it blows away Kyle and is like, how did you do that? And it's like, well, I am a genius. And
too much of that would become tedious.
We got 2 lines like that in this episode, and that's the worst of the 2. The other I can kind of accept as swagger, Christine Chapel's line, because it's not so over the top as, well, I am a genius.
Yeah, right.
So if you're that much of a genius, you would know to keep it to yourself.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, I got she was just saying it more as a joke anyways.
Well, for her,
Hemmer's didn't come across as a joke.
No.
Yeah.
Well, he had a couple of lines where, there's one about, well, you realize it's going to take all night.
Yeah.
And of course,
that was funny.
That was funny, but at the same time, it's like, well, duh. Do it anyways.
Yeah, it's going to be done. So at one point, enough people have been infected that Mbenga calls for a shipwide lockdown, which, gives me flashbacks. And
I know. It's like, got to keep those bio beds in sickbay open for new patients. 2 hours to flatten the curve.
That's right. So meanwhile, on the surface, Pike and Spock are taking shelter from the storm in this archive. And Spock says he's discovered, reading their journals and their blog posts, that the Illyrians were seeking to demodify themselves to rejoin the Federation, as we mentioned. And this is about the...
Because everyone knows the Federation is so where you got to be. It's so awesome.
Right. I mean, I would totally demodify my genetic enhancements to join it. And this is about the time when Spike, I've done it. Pike and Spock. It's now a thing. Spike is going to be a thing. Pike and Spock see these fire ghosts in the storm. And I do like the misdirection they're giving us here, because our natural reaction to seeing fiery beings flying around in the storm is to think, oh, these are bad guys. These are the enemy. And they build this up because they're trying to... Pike and Spock make the same assumption. They try to barricade themselves in away from these fire ghosts. And they in fact end up battering down the door to get at them and injure Spock in the process. We have to note
briefly. I mean, you get a little scratch, but still.
As Pike says, if that had been, an inch away, it would have hit your carotid artery.
Yeah.
And if I had one, I'm like, he apparently doesn't have a carotid as a Vulcan.
So all we get to see is a little green scratch, but got to see that green blood at every opportunity. But it turns out they're, like you said, the Illyrians who have been modified, who are trying to protect them from the storm by covering them with their fiery bodies. So I like the fact that we've... Here, I'm made of fire. Let me lay on top of you. Yeah,
exactly.
There's something about me you might want to know.
It feels a little warm in this little oven you've created.
Yeah. Exactly.
So there was this point where Hemmer is doing his shipwide diagnostic and just checking out the medical transporter, and it was really this weird interaction that at the time didn't make any sense. And I made a note, like Hemmer, it wants to turn things off, and Mbenga surreptitiously flips a switch back on behind his back as Hemmer leaves. And it's like
Mbenga is also just freaking out about Hemmer wanting to inspect his emergency medical transporter. In my notes, I had Mbenga doesn't want med transporter examined.
Right. So now of course, we get that explanation later, which I'm grateful for. But it was kind of I made a note of it at this point.
I wondered if Mbenga was somehow like patient zero or something, or not patient zero, but somehow under the influence of the light virus and was not letting it on and was somehow using the medical transporter for evil purposes.
Right. Well, it turns out Hemmer was because Hemmer tries to beam aboard part of the planet's core and is only stopped at the last second by Una, who stops him.
He's actually got a chunk of it. It's like this big glowing, irregularly shaped ball of magma hovering in the transporter area, and he's trying to finalize its materialization. As Una comes in, he's talking, this is going to be so cool, you'll want to stay and see this.
Oh man. That was pretty wild. And she stops him and gets him off to sickbay.
And this is our first clue that she is
she's not
that she is not a normal human, because she just throws a big lightweight dummy of him over her shoulder and walks down a hallway carrying him as if he were a big lightweight dummy that a normal human woman couldn't carry that easily.
Right. And that's what she reveals to, I think, Mbenga and Chapel, that she's immune because she got the disease and her bioengineered immune system fought it off because she's secretly an Illyrian. Now, I don't recall, but did the Enterprise Illyrians, didn't they have like head bump thingies?
Yeah, but if you're genetically engineering yourself, you can look like whatever you want.
Right. Okay. So now when
what I think is implausible though is she's able to join Starfleet and pass a genetic test and not have them realize she's an Illyrian.
Well, Bashir will do that again in 80 years through the same loopholes, apparently.
Well, I thought of that, but having Bashir is basically, I mean, is a human. He's got a human genetic code. He just has certain genetic combinations that give him enhanced abilities, but those combinations are found in other humans.
Yeah.
So it's not like an artificial thing. But if you're, I mean, how do you join Starfleet and not have them know your race?
Right. Well, yeah, we had that Romulan.
I mean, at a minimum. Well, did we? Oh, well, the spy in Picard. Yeah. But they're like Vulcans, so a light genetic modification would make her seem fully Vulcan on a genetic level.
I mean, could the Illyrians have built her basically to look like a human DNA? Well,
the Klingons managed to turn Ash Tyler into a human being through a more crude process.
That was also not at all believable.
No,
but it's just I'm snagging on the fact that if this is not a human being, that would show up on a genetic test. And now they did introduce in episode 1 of this season of Strange New Worlds, giving people a temporary genetic modification to let them pass a cursory scan. But this isn't a cursory thing. Number one, needs to pass as human or something that Starfleet recognizes for a long time. Otherwise, she needs, because as soon as they do a genetic test, it's going to be, okay, you're not a human. What are you?
Right.
And she's going to need an explanation. And if the explanation isn't I'm an Illyrian, which it apparently wasn't, then what was it? Was it I was found on an asteroid and no one knows what I am, or what?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because every time you beam up, every time you get a physical, all that sort of stuff is going to.
Yeah.
I mean,
and that's where I'm kind of leaning towards. She must have had her DNA changed to pass as human, even if it's not 100%. It's close enough that it matches the profile that Starfleet is expecting, and
within the parameters of human.
Yeah,
it's possible.
By the way, as she's talking about all this to Dr. Mbenga, there's a moment, and this could have been just the actor's choice, but I thought it was a great moment because it's the kind of thing that you wouldn't expect to see in a script. But they go into like Mbenga's office or something, number one, and Mbenga. And as they go in, he's just been infected and he's in the early stages. But he says at some point, you're going to have to sedate me because that's what they're having to do to keep these people under control, is sedate them. And as they go into his office, number one is following him, and his hand just goes up towards this light panel on his wall.
Yep.
And number one snatches his hand back down, and they don't talk about it. They don't make anything out of it. But I just love that little bit of his hand just naturally goes up to this light source, and she yanks it back down.
Yeah, it looked like he was reaching for the panel, like he was going to touch the screen and do, the whole computer thingy. But no, he keeps going above it. That was.
Yep. And
there's another point, Lon, when she first starts showing symptoms, where she puts her hand down and then slides it to this light panel that's on the table.
Yeah.
And then that's when she grabs the desktop lamp and basically sticks her face in it.
By the way, in that same scene, Mbenga makes a comment about how even after, even after humans went into space and meeting their neighbors in the stars, they found new bigotries, first about mixing human and Vulcan blood, and now human and Illyrian blood. And this was a reference to another set of Enterprise episodes where there was this human faction that was opposed to mixing of the humans and Vulcans. And I think Peter Weller was in that one.
Yes, he was the leader of it.
Yeah, that's the real ending to... That 3 episode arc is the real ending to Enterprise, not that fake ending holodeck where Trip allegedly gets killed.
Yes,
for no reason,
for no good reason.
And the mixing of the human and Vulcan blood was Trip and DePaul, who were developing a relationship.
Right. So in this case, Mbenga is responding to her concerns about using her genetic resistance to find a cure. Sorry, my watch just beeped to remind me to take my vitamin D. Literally, my doctor has
more light.
Yeah, my doctor has prescribed that I take vitamin D on a regular basis since I sit at a desk all day, and I take it after lunch. And this is late in the day. So
and vitamin D deficiency is highly correlated with COVID infection.
Right. So definitely take your vitamin, which may be another reason why that came up in this episode, because this episode came out, post or in the midst of COVID, depending on how you look at things. Anyway, La'an finds out that Una is an augment from her point of view, and La'an, being a descendant of Khan, and unhappily so, because she's been attacked.
La'an is a self-hating augment,
right?
Or self-loathing augment.
She's been bullied basically for it, and suspected because of her heritage, her name, and so that makes her reject Una, who she considered a friend, who saved her basically.
When she's under the influence of the light virus and trying to release the core, she and Una fight, and La'an tells Una, "You're a monster."
Right.
Yep.
And that was in the midst of that fight. The radiation coming off the core as the containment is going down causes Una to make new antibodies to fight off, and that creates chimeric antibodies in La'an, and those are the ones that they then synthesize for the rest of the crew. So
so we should probably clarify what a chimeric antibody would be. So antibodies are little bodies inside your body that fight off things. Chimeric antibodies, so something's a chimera if it includes parts of different organisms. And so any antibodies that number one generated, if they get into La'an, who is a different person, they will be chimeric because they're coming from a different organism, namely from number one.
Right.
So the technobabble makes sense in this case.
Right. They did a little work on getting the science in this a bit close to real.
Actually, based on the original English definition of monster, it did mean a deformed human. And so saying to number one, "You're a monster," would have been literally true in the 1300s when the word was being used that way.
So meanwhile, back on the planet where Pike and Spock are just kind of hanging out, they have not been that involved in this episode, just to point out. But Spock comes to the conclusion that the Illyrians ironically died because they'd removed their bioengineering, that the ones who didn't survive the storms, the colony has been destroyed. They are the ones who died because they removed their bioengineering, and that they made themselves vulnerable, which is a bit of a sad irony. And as you mentioned, number one turns herself into Pike. She's going to resign Starfleet, give herself over to be, arrested.
In a genetic modifications episode, turned herself into Pike. I read that wrong.
She became a shapeshifter and took over him and threw him out an airlock, and Pike is now dead. Anyway, he rejects her resignation and says because of his experience, Illyrians are vastly misunderstood. And that goes back to what you were saying earlier, Jimmy, about how so far Strange New Worlds has been setting things up to really challenge Federation orthodoxies, Federation
and
claims.
It's similar in that respect to the original series, because in the original series, some Federation thing would be explained and Kirk would just say, "I don't care, we're doing this."
Yes.
And we see that same attitude across the Enterprise crew here. Not only does Pike not turn in Pike does not turn in number one, and he broke the Prime Directive in the first episode. Mbenga does not care about the fact that he would be using Illyrian DNA to save people, even though he shouldn't, according to their rules. Nurse Chapel doesn't care. Number one does not care about how Mbenga has been breaking regulations. You've got a lot of, I don't care if you're doing the right thing. I don't care if it's against the rules or not.
Ultimately, isn't this what Pike's fate is about, though. In the end, when he goes back to Telos 4, in Spock brings him back to Telos 4 as a rejection of this, one of the only rule that is a capital offense in Starfleet regulations is a rejection of that rule for the sake of Pike. So it's kind of interesting. I wonder if that's intentional all along.
It's certainly interesting. They're disregarding rules in a way that you would never see on Next Gen.
No.
Or Voyager, which is weird because Voyager is in this extreme situation where you should be ignoring rules.
Right. Yeah.
And you'd see a little bit more of this on Deep Space Nine because of the nature of the station and Captain Sisko's management style. Mm-hmm. But I'm giving them, I view this as a positive. So I want to give the writers credit for, it seems like they've realized this attitude was characteristic of this era of Starfleet history. And so they're allowing themselves to have that flexibility that writers in the original series had.
So, talking about M'Benga, he's got his daughter. I don't know if they give an age, but she's young. She's 12,
I think.
Yeah. That's the sense I had. So maybe they did say 12, who has this disease that's incurable. And, he has, as a last ditch effort, put her in the pattern buffer. I'm not sure where her mom is or, the rest of the family, but it's an interesting open question. But they
must have died in a shuttle accident because that's what happens to off-screen parents and siblings.
That's true. He's put her in the pattern buffer, which is interesting because apparently suspended animation, the stasis is the Star Trek version of it, would not have let her survive, I guess. Only the pattern buffer would do it. And has been storing her there. And he says you can be stored in the pattern buffer indefinitely if you rematerialize every once in a while. And then.
And this is one of a number of points where the writers were clearly writing around other episodes. I mean, a lot of this is written around Dr. Bashir's genetic reveal. And here at this point, they're now writing around the Scotty return visit because he was stored in a pattern buffer for 80 years and he had to do something special to make that happen. Otherwise, he would have degraded in the pattern buffer. So M'Benga is saying that he does periodically rematerialize his daughter to refresh her, to make sure the pattern buffer doesn't degrade. And that makes sense. But what didn't make sense to me, I mean, I know why they did it. It's because they want a touching ending. But on the rational level, if you've got to rematerialize her and beam her right back into the pattern buffer. Do not, if she's got less than 12 weeks to live, I mean, we're told she was given a 12-week lifespan once she was diagnosed with this disease. And he talked about how hard it was to watch your daughter wasting away. So obviously a good chunk of that 12 weeks is used up. And so when you need to bring her out, go put her right back in as soon as possible. Do not tell her bedtime stories.
Right. That's true. That is true. I mean,
especially since the only thing she's going to remember is bedtime story after bedtime story after bedtime story.
Yeah, exactly. As a dad, I mean, it's very, very affecting, this idea that you can't, you've got to store her. You can't be with her. She's stored in the buffer. He's telling you the story, and this is what he reads from it. I wonder if this is some kind of foreshadowing of what's to come, or if it's metaphor for what happens in this episode. But it says, if King Ridley would seek out the Mercury Stone and win it as his own, his victory over Queen Neve, or Nev, would be assured. It is said that in the right hands, the Mercury Stone has the power to cleanse the land of evil and bring prosperity to all. But if it were fall into the wrong hands, the Mercury Stone's power would bring about a terrible, long-lasting dark age across the land, because you would snap your fingers and half of the universe would die. Oh, no, I added that part.
I was thinking I've seen this story only with hobbits.
Yeah, that's the other one.
There's a lot of them. Basically, this is a MacGuffin with powers for good and evil. So that's loads of stories.
So I wonder if it's just the story, or if they're trying to say something that maybe more to be said. But that's where the episode ends. So we've learned a lot about Una. We've learned a lot about M'Benga. So that's interesting in itself. Before I get to, like, if you have final comments, I just want to ask, Several of the people in our Discord community said that this was their least favorite of the 3 episodes so far. It felt a little too much like Naked Time, or just a little too derivative of other TOS episodes or TNG episodes. But what did you guys think about it? How did you feel about this one?
I will say I agree that it's, of the 3, the one I've liked the least. However, that's kind of like saying good, better, best.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the episode. There are some things, here in a minute when we talk about, further, but I'll just mention now, one thing I'm not a fan of all of a sudden now, all these, they're doing the back character thing where every back character has to have some tragedy or some problem or some hidden secret.
Okay.
That has to be affecting them, so now number 1 is basically is a superwoman that's been hiding that for all these years, and Omega's got his daughter that he's been putting the ship at risk to keep her alive and things like that. And it's just like, did we really need those? Right. But beyond that, I did enjoy the episode. The first thing I did write down is naked time, but attracted to light. I mean, that was the first thing I wrote down on my notes.
Right. How about you, Jimmy? How do you feel about this episode?
I don't know that I'm in a position yet to rank the recent episodes. I'm still getting a feel for this series, and it's something I've discovered a long time ago, actually with music first, was that I often don't appreciate something on first listen, and I need to hear it a few times before I get what the artist is doing. And so I know that happens with me with music, and it tends to happen with other things too. I don't hate, I mean, I can make a judgment usually pretty quickly. Do I hate this or not? And I don't hate this. I liked this. I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty creepy as an episode. I mean, some of the things they do with the light virus are effective. I mean, and they have a nice build with it. Like the first guy, Lieutenant Redshirt, who gets infected, when he beams up to the ship and Ortegas encounters him staring at a light fixture in the hallway, he's like, obsessed with this light, and he's getting this light on his hands and his face. And then suddenly he headbutts the light and breaks the glass. And it's like, wow, did not see that coming. And then when number 1 goes into we have other people like caressing light bulbs and putting lights to shine directly into their face, like those hooded desk lamps. And then number 1 comes into the transporter room, and Hemmer has this glowing thing hovering there in midair. And then the ultimate threat, we're releasing the containment on the warp core. It's this nice build, and it's creepy. Right. So I was processing this. I mean, I recognize, some of the things structurally they're doing, like in this series, we're getting our let's meet the crew. Instead of just focusing on the main characters, Pike, number 1, and Spock. And that's fine. That's one of the criticisms I had of Discovery, was it was too much about the main character. Who are these people I see every week on the bridge? I don't know their names. Like I knew Uhura's name and Chekhov's name and Sulu's name. So they're taking the opposite approach from Discovery. And that's fine. Although I do understand that some people, I've heard it criticized that I would rather learn more about the central characters at this point. And that's a fair difference. But I don't know that I can rank these yet, because that's a finer judgment than do I like it or not. I like these episodes, including this one. I just took it as a horror, we're in a haunted house type episode, and it worked for me.
Okay. So any final notes, Father Cory?
Nothing here.
Jimmy?
I got it out. So,
yeah. So I don't know that I would have made number 1 an Illyrian, because I've always thought of her as a human. But the fact she's an augment would explain some of her weirdness, because even from her appearance in The Cage, where she was played by Majel Barrett, later Majel Barrett Roddenberry, she's been weird. I mean, not weird in a way that she's inhuman, but she's just been weird, and having her be an augment, can explain that. So I can accept that. I probably wouldn't have made her an Illyrian though, but it does work in the context of this story. One thing that she did at the end, where she's talking to her personal log, is she's admitting her genetic status, and worse, she's talking about the fact that Pike is covering for her now. And I'm like, do not say this to a machine. Do not ever say that out loud in a technological environment.
Right. Alexa's listening.
Exactly. Yeah. But at least she did. And this is another thing that I think was in the writers' minds. In the Pale Moonlight in Deep Space Nine is all a log entry where Captain Sisko admits to committing war crimes.
Right.
And he's telling his log entry to get it out of his system. And at the end of the episode, he deletes the entry.
Right.
And so as I'm watching Una talk to her log, I'm going, you should not be saying this. And finally at the end, she says, computer delete log entry. So it's like, phew, we step back from the brink of idiocy there. One last thought. Now, you may wonder, how could a virus spread by light? I mean, how could light have an effect on behavior in this way? Well, it turns out that there's something known these days as biophotons. This is something we have fairly recently discovered. Now, it's been known for a long time that all matter generates electromagnetic energy. So we have electromagnetic energy coming off of our bodies at a low level all the time. But specifically, our bodies biologically generate photons, and we're not sure how. And we're not sure why. But the biophotons seem to be connected with communications between our cells. And they may be involved in healing processes and things like that, but they seem to be involved in transmitting information between our cells. I have heard and read it reported that barn owls, sometimes you see them at night and they seem to glow because of biophotons they're giving off. But biophotons are released by lots of species, including our own. And I know a guy who is studying biophotons, who's doing laboratory experiments where they have this super darkened room that's double sealed from light to keep any photons from getting in. And they have a very sensitive photon measuring device in the dark room. And then they bring people in and study how their biophotons change depending on what they're doing. And they find that people who meditate, or who are martial artists who are meditating, or who are psychics that try to heal people, will generate more biophotons when they're doing their thing. And so given that biophotons seem to be involved from other research in terms of cellular communication, you could have a kind of not biogenerated photon, but bioactive photon pattern that this virus uses to spread itself through cellular communications.
Huh. Interesting. By the way, I just had a thought when you were talking about Majel Barrett. I realized there are 3 characters in Strange New Worlds that were all formerly played by Majel Barrett.
Yeah.
Una.
Yep.
Christine Chapel.
Yep.
And the computer.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this is a very Majel Barrett. She's the ghost of the Enterprise in this case. Awesome. All right. So here's our feedback. We have some great feedback coming up from, for our first bit is from our last episode where we talked about Children of the Comet. And Heather M on our Discord community shared, we just watched episode 2. Love it. The forehead of the week is back. I love the design of the Shepherd. I love the crew being in an impossible predicament and seeing how they show their personalities to work together, except Mustache Kirk. He was basically useless.
Yeah, I don't think he's turning into a breakout character anytime soon.
No,
I think he's the one that's most likely to be regarded as a serious misstep.
Right. She says, Uhura was a standout, just like the guys said on the last podcast. They're choosing a character each week to reveal a little more about.
I'm the guy.
Yes,
Yeah.
Jimmy is the guys.
Yeah. We gave you a ditto on that. We agreed.
Yes, perfection. I haven't seen a lot of TOS, but I've read several TOS novels. Good stories that break the limits of what they would have been able to do with TV at that time. That's what this episode felt like. A weird one-off alien encounter and a stressful situation that leads to solid character moments. Yes,
Yeah.
I agree. There were some great TOS novels that really went beyond what could ever have been done on TV. One that stands out for me is a novel by Diane Duane called The Wounded Sky, which had some ultra alien creatures that would have been impossible to do in TV even back in the 80s. It really feels like that they've really been able to step out beyond it. We also had some feedback on this episode, which not our discussion, but on the Ghosts of Illyria itself that we got in. And we'd love to get that feedback. Actually, if you want to send us feedback before we've talked about it, that's fine. Just after you've watched the episode. This one came from Joseph, who sent an email who said, just watched the episode. I was prepared to dislike it. It felt kind of disjointed at the start. I find that happens when episodes rely heavily on para-canon material. To be honest, I don't really know much of the backstory or lore about Illyria. But as we discussed, the Illyria was actually in canon in Enterprise. But boy, howdy, did this episode come through. It was a detective story on so many fronts. What happened to the colonists? Where did the fire monsters come from? How did this disease get onto the ship? And each of these had a very satisfying resolution. But moreover, the personal and interpersonal character development was well written and then acted and directed and edited into an engaging and edifying whole. Pike's assurance of Una, Una's assurance of Mabenga, Una and La'an's confrontation in the mess hall, and the hooks at the end, Una's log entry, and Mabenga's stolen moments with his daughter. I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say about this episode, but I gotta tell you, I'm gobsmacked to say that Strange New Worlds has perhaps displaced TOS from the top of my list of favorite series.
Wow.
That is high praise.
That's high praise.
Especially after 3 episodes.
I'm not sure. My favorite series is DS9. I'm not prepared to say that yet. That has 7 seasons. Yeah. This has 3 episodes. But
but it's only got 4.5 good ones.
Right. Well, the 4.5 good seasons. Yeah. We'll see where it goes. But thank you both, Joseph and Heather, for your feedback.
And I say that as DS9 is my favorite too. I just acknowledged the first. It takes a few seasons to really get engaged with its ultimate main plot.
That's right.
Right. And I'm with you, Jimmy, at least as far as ranking this entire series where it ranks, maybe not so much individual episodes, but I definitely have to wait and see how the series goes, because we've seen series and seasons where they went downhill very quickly. Discovery. And that didn't exactly start from a high point to begin with. So
yeah, well, Discovery started off not so good, got good in its second season, and a little okay. It got good in the second season, and then went downhill again in the third and fourth.
It time jumped off a cliff, basically.
Yeah, right. Anyway, thank you all for your feedback. Before we go, we want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create Secrets of Star Trek, including Father Colin W., Colleen T., David M., Russell Y., and John K. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So that's it from us. We'd love to hear what you think of Ghosts of Illyria or the next episode. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek or our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. You can send an email to trek@sqpn.com or visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the next new episode of Strange New Worlds called Memento Mori. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thank you, and I'm afraid I have to resign my SQPN commission because I have a secret I've been hiding from everyone. Despite all appearances, I actually am a human.
Jimmy's not a Time Lord. And once again...
Well, I didn't say that.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest, and remember... Don't thank me. I know I'm good at my job.